All right. That is the late Tito Puente and his band here, and you're watching What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And I'm very excited to have our guest today, our second guest today, who was a very close friend, confidant, working partner with the late Tito Puente, Joe Conzo Sr., who is also the foremost authority on the late Afro-Cuban jazz master. And Joe's going to be on the show today. We're going to talk a little bit about their relationship, Tito's music, and a documentary that he is getting involved with that is going to, where he may play a role as a consultant. Hi, Joe. You there?
How you doing? Okay, yeah, I'm here. You go.
Good. That's good. We had to have Joe call in for various technical issues, but you can see his picture there. We got the picture of you with your Christmas tie on, just so you know.
Oh, one of those, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So before the show started, you were talking about that particular song, which is of course one of my favorites of Puente's, Para los Rumberos. You were saying there's actually three different versions of it. You want to talk about that for a second?
Well, yeah, the original version was Mongo Santa Maria, Willie Bobo, and Tito. That was recorded in 1956. The second version was actually called Pablo Rumberos. That was the title of the album. That came out in the late 60s, early 70s. That was Santana's version. Then Tito did another version, a combination of both, in 1992 for the soundtrack of the Mambo Kings, which I was a consultant and I appeared in there as a killer.
Which you are.
Yeah.
And you're also, a friend of the college. You've been a guest of ours for a couple of our Hispanic Heritage events, where you've spoken about Puente and his influences. But tell us, why don't we start by talking a little bit about you, Joe? You want to tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about yourself?
No, I'm 78 years old. I've been around the block 1,000 times. I was born like Tito, born and raised in Spanish Harlem. And I did a stint in the service, served my country for 3 years. I went to Korea, Japan, and I tell people, get used to wearing a mask. This is a way of life for these people in Korea and in Japan. And I was there in 1959. So here we are. Joey's 57, my older son, and it's almost 60 years ago. So if they were wearing a mask, folks out there get used to wearing a mask, even if we have a vaccine now.
Right.
But other than that, I'm a retired social worker. I work for the city of New York, and I'm considered one of the foremost authorities and historians in the world on the man and his music, Tito Puente. I wrote a book called Mambo Diablo, My Journey with Tito Puente. I collaborated with another friend of mine, David Perez. And basically that's it. And I teach a course that's going on 14 years at Hostos Community College on the history of Tito Puente, jazz, culture, and that's why I did Hispanic Heritage Month with you guys, not only to talk about Tito Puente, but to talk about other pioneers who are part of our culture.
Yeah. So, Joe, when did you meet Puente?
I met Tito in 1959 at the Palladium. But like me, he thought I was another groupie, like everybody else. Hello, goodbye, very cordial. Then I ran into him again on my way to Korea, in Japan, USO. USO would put on shows for the military. I got to see Bob Hope in Korea, and Tito happened to be playing in one of the ballrooms in Japan for the USO. And I went up to him and he said, "You look familiar." I told him who I was. And, he shook my hand and blah, blah, blah. And that was it. But I'm a firm believer in destiny. I grew up with Tito's wife.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Tito's older son, Ronnie Puente, went to school with my sister, St. Athanasius. I'm the oldest, but it was meant to be. And then when I came back from Korea, and then I would go to the Palladium and I'd see Tito, and slowly but surely we developed. Tito was from the streets, and he realized I was from the streets, and Tito didn't trust a lot of people. He was very private. I mean, he was an entertainer, but his private life was his private life. And then Margie came into the picture, his wife, and then he put two and two together, and from then on we became bosom buddies. You know, until he passed away on May 31st, year 2000. I was with him in Puerto Rico when he got sick. Most of the time I wouldn't go to Europe. I would go stay stateside, and we played as a consultant for the movie Mambo Kings. I was instrumental in getting Tito involved with that project, and Pacheco and all the other artists. Desi Arnaz Jr. So it was a major thing. And I've been involved when it comes to the roots. I did an exhibit in 1977 with Felipe Luciano and Charlie Palmer, the only exhibit that ever existed in the United States, called Latin Roots. And we used a clipping of Desi Arnaz, and he came to the exhibit. So it was an exhibit.
Desi Senior? Nice.
Desi Senior and Desi Junior and Lucy Junior. Because I used a poster. And
nice.
I posted pictures with Desi Senior and with both of them,
So
he had his.
I mean,
go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was gonna. Were you finished, or did you want to?
No. I was going to say that for people out there, you want to understand, Desi Arnaz was Latin music, TV's Latin music superstar. He was a superstar on TV.
Yeah.
He invented the 3-camera thing, and
still used today.
Yeah, which is used today, and you're into photography. I mean, the guy was a genius. Here's a guy that his wife had to fight for him, Lucia Ball, because they didn't want a Spaniard on TV. But she said, "Then you don't get me," and the rest is history.
Yes.
Because they did a radio show. It was a radio show, and then it was transferred to, like another example in Hollywood, Xavier Cugat was Latin music's first superstar. I mean, people like to think Shakira, Gloria Estefan, J-Lo. No, we had superstars in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and it was part of Hollywood and the record industry, So, but unfortunately, these superstars today don't talk about the stars of yesteryear.
Well, they may not even know him. I mean, I'm 58. I grew up watching I Love Lucy, but I didn't like you were pointing out, which is I did not know Desi's role with Desilu Studios, which they were like a juggernaut of the 50s, and it was his business acumen, that was one of the things that made it. I mean, obviously, Lucille Ball as well, and she continued to run it, after the divorce.
Oh yeah, well that was the agreement. That was the agreement. He sold it to her,
right?
And
but they were friends. And I think it's like it gets lost, and it's I mean I think that's an important piece about when you wrote the book about Puente, and you tell there's a lot of information there and things that they don't know. In particular, for example,
go ahead.
No, it's your book. You talk about it.
No, in the book, I had an interview. I sat down Machito, Miguelito Valdez, who was the original Babalu, who
Yeah,
made
right.
Babalu famous,
Yeah,
Federico Pagani, Mario Bausa, I mean, and then Tito Puente, Charlie Brown. I mean, these guys are talking about yesteryear.
right.
And the judge, Edwin Torres, he 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 flipped out. He says he had so much fun with those interviews because I left them in Spanish and how they talked about the racism in the late 30s and 40s in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, and in the United States. And it was a source of information from the pioneers.
Right.
And,
When you,
and
oh, oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, I was going to just say, we've talked about your friendship with Puente, and that you're obviously very close to him. What what was your role for the business? Because you worked with him, right? You worked for him and handled things.
No, I worked with him. I worked for him as a consultant, as his public relations and things like that, and things that he would forget, and I would bring it to his attention and to the manager's attention, because Ralph McCullough was his manager. I was like his girl Friday, or I guess his boy Friday. I was all over the place. If he wanted something done, he knew I would get it done, you know. And he
Right.
would ask me, and I was compensated for it, But whatever he needed, uh, I wasn't the guy that went and made coffee for him or ran and got him coffee. No, I was with him, in any role that he wanted me to play. But if he wanted something, he says, I'll ask Joe to do it because Joe will get it done. He
Yes.
wanted me to get a hold of the President of the United States. Everybody says, you can't do it. Give it to Joe. He'll find a way to get a hold of it. You know, just to give you an example, I mean, Tito was as famous as he was. He met so many people, and he would forget who they were. An example: one day I'm walking down the street with him in Houston Street. Hey, Tito, and Tito naturally would say hello. He says, "Who was that?" I said, "It was John Gotti's brother." it was it was Peter Gotti. I mean, you talk
And,
about all elements of life. He met all these people, and
well,
they were
if
there.
you're in the entertainment business and you're working in clubs,
And
you're going to meet them
yeah,
all.
I mean, we
When
met them
did
all.
you?
I Go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead. I hate to interrupt you when you're on a roll,
No, no, no. Go ahead.
but
Hello.
when did you move into this role as becoming the historian? Because that's
I
what you
was
you
always
ended
a
up.
historian. I
Yeah.
was always a historian. It became natural. I started buying 78 records and I started looking at them and comparing them to other records. And then I would ask Machito questions, Miguelito Valdez, who I got to meet, excuse me, Mario Bausa, Tito, of course. And well, this was done in the 50s. This was done in Cuba, and you had no other choice because you were surrounded by them. Ray Barreto. There was a restaurant in the city called the Asia. It was a Cuban Chinese restaurant. They all walked in there. I mean, you went. It was on 55th Street and 8th Avenue, and you walked in there. You would see who's who up from Broadway, but you would also see who's who in Latin music, and they were very friendly. People would talk, and you know, I remember walking into a restaurant with Tito and cousin Brucey said, "Excuse me, sir." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You're Brucey." He said, "Yeah, cousin Brucey." He says, "Is that Tito Puente?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Could I meet him?" I mean, this was something to see. Before Tito died,
You're talking about
he
Bruce
won.
Lee, the martial arts guy. Is that what you mean?
No, no, cousin Brucey, the disc jockey,
Oh, yeah.
the
Now
rockin' man.
yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't grow
yeah.
up in New York like
No,
for
all
very
right,
long,
but
so I
then
wouldn't know that.
well, I'll give you another example. Neil Diamond. Now, you've heard of Neil Diamond,
Yeah, I heard
right?
of Neil Diamond. That's right.
Okay. We're in Radio City Music Hall, backstage. Neil Diamond is there. Barbara Walters is there. Cap Calloway is there. Dionne Warwick. I could go on and on. Neil Diamond calls me over. Is that Tito Puente? I said, yeah. Could I meet him? I said, of course. I bring Tito over to him. I said, Tito, Neil Diamond, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, to cut to the chase, we walk away. Tito says, who the hell was that? I said, that's Neil Diamond. I never heard of him. This is Tito. I said, he could buy Radio City Music Hall 3 times over. Yeah. Because Tito would, that was the attitude sometimes. Yeah. When he saw Neil Diamond come out the pit, because there's a pit in Radio City Music Hall and doing America, because it was for the birthday of Martin Luther King. And he said, oh my God, now I realized who he was. I mean,
so he had a respect. He didn't
looking,
respect necessarily a name or reputation, but he did respected people's ability to perform, right? Their musical chops.
Oh, yeah. Automatically. Getting back to that particular night, Tito's talking to Barbara Walters. And, he introduced me to her, and it was a pleasure to me. Barbara Walters, which I have recordings. Her father owned the Latin Quarter, Lou Walters. And I have a live recording of Tito Puente in 1948, which was given to me from another musician at her father's nightclub. Her father was very famous. He had a nightclub called the Latin Quarter. I could tell you play in Studio 54. Tito was the first to play in Studio 54.
The first Latin musician, or just
Latin orchestra, Latin band leader to play in Studio 54. When we played there, when I say we were there, he says, nobody's dancing. I said, because you're playing disco music. I want you to let the audience know what I really told him. I said, play some Latin music, which he did, and everybody started dancing.
So he had adapted. He adapted his play set for the location.
Oh, no matter. That was always Tito said. You look at the audience. He always said, look at the audience, and that's what you figure. Being that Studio 54 was that disco place, he figured he'd do that. And he played disco music, but then he turned around and he said, nope. And I told him play Latin music, and he started playing Latin music, me and Jimmy, his other right-hand man, his real right-hand man, and the public went wild. And from then on, in all the disco places, Tito would play Latin music. And then when he won the Grammy, the last Grammy before he died, we're walking backstage at the hotel, and there's Clive Davis. There's Willie Nelson. Hey, Tito. I said, you gotta be kidding. In my mind, I'm saying, Willie Nelson, the king of country, was talking to Tito Puente. Clive Davis, who discovered Whitney Houston. She was at that Martin Luther King, too. She wasn't as famous.
She was probably hanging around, right, with the Warwick family, right?
Yeah, with the Warwick family, Cap Calloway. It was something to see. This was royalty. You had Tito, when he played, but they all respected him. They loved him. Dizzy Gillespie, George Benson. A perfect example where it never happened was the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra.
What happened with Sinatra? They met.
They were going to do an album. They were going to do an album together, but because of the timing and everything, and the technology, it didn't work out. But it was something to see. Meet these people, go to the Waldorf Astoria, talk about doing a Tito Puente scholarship fund. Frank Sinatra was interested. Bill Graham, who discovered Santana. Everybody wanted to be part of it. Tito was well respected.
When because you have, besides having a musical archive of performances, you also have audio recordings again of all of these kinds. I mean, when I go on like the New York Giants, I forgot the roster was always I think it was Tito Rodriguez, Tito Puente, and Machito. they would they would talk about, they call them the
three.
Cuban Giants. I mean the New York Giants.
Yeah, that's what I was. Those were the big three.
Yeah, but so now they're all hanging out, like you said, on 8th Avenue and 55th Street talking. You're there with a tape recorder. How did they all feel about that?
No problem. They talked. They trusted me. They trusted Tito because I was with Tito. I grew up around those guys.
Right.
Machito was part of Harlem. It was nothing to see Machito walk down the street and say hello to him. You know, I mean, it was something to see. I mean, these guys were accessible. Let me put it to you that way. They were all accessible. So it wasn't, you weren't dealing with a J-Lo, a Shakira, a Beyonce that had bodyguards.
Right.
The bodyguards were the people. Many times Tito would play in Orchard Beach, and the police say, Tito, we have an escort. Tito says, no, you don't. I got my escort, my people, and Joe's here. And that was it. And he never wanted people to, he wanted to be accessible to the people. Celia Cruz was that way also. Always accessible to the people. You know.
You just reminded me.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the last time that I kind of saw you physically, I think may have been at Orchard Beach for when the band performed. They called them, I don't know, the Latin. Yeah, the Mambo Legends, and they performed out under the tarp. Your son, Joe Jr., invited me, and he got me access. We were taking pictures.
I was there. Yeah, I was there.
That was, and that's, you know, but that's
Tito
something.
Would play. You know, Tito would play in Orchard Beach like nothing.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that must have been something for all those years. So I think the last time we talked, you were in the process of actually putting your entire archive, like turning over your archive. Is that something you've done?
I
where
did.
You found a home for it?
Yeah, we found a home. We found where Joey's photography is.
Cornell. So Cornell.
Yes.
So they've got all the audio, video, and everything else.
Audio. They got no. That's it. I got all the audio live.
Right.
I got audio. No, the audio live. I didn't part with. That's more. I still got over 7,000 live recordings of Tito alone. But I have from other artists, Machito, Tito Rodriguez, Cuba, Fajardo, all that stuff. Live recordings. What do you want me to do? You gonna say? What am I gonna do?
I was gonna say, what are your plans? I think obviously you're a little older than me, but I'm already thinking about. Yeah, I'm 58, and I started to think about what am I going to do?
I got you about 20 years. When Joey's mother passed away.
Yeah.
That was a mind blower. You were there. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was the funeral. I remember.
Right.
By the way, so let me just say this: you're listening and watching to WLGR LaGuardia Web Radio. The show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guest today is Joe Conzo Sr., who is the foremost authority on the life, music, performing history of the late Tito Puente, Afro-Cuban jazz musician extraordinaire. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Joe. That's just my little station break.
So Joey, when she passed away because of Maria, the hurricane and everything.
Yeah, right. The complications.
I was always going to leave Joey my collection.
Right.
And that was it. And Joey said, Dad, do you have a will? And I said, I've been having a will. And are you still giving me your collection? And I said, yeah. He says, well, you want to give it to Cornell and you can make a few dollars and donate? I said, fine. Oh yeah, that's what most collectors do.
No, I
Historians,
know
they
it's
yeah. So I told Joey, and they took it. Cornell took it, and
and God and
behind the
yeah.
pandemic, I cannot go up there to help them put it together, but they have it.
So it's all going to
You
go.
know.
It'll eventually be available on the internet the way that Joe's
Oh
collection is,
yeah,
right? Photographs.
yes, eventually, yeah, but you have to identify them. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
exactly.
another
Tell them what.
job.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a job in itself. I mean, you talk about cassettes, CDs, and then you have the ones that come from record companies. Those are identifiable. The other ones, 78s.
right.
You want to put stories behind 78s, 45s. It's things that sometimes I miss them, sometimes I don't. When I'm looking for something, I say, "Oh shit!" Then I remember
Oh,
I
watch out,
have it.
Joe. We're I'm bound
I realize by law.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
You
the
know.
FCC.
Thank you, sir.
I got
Exactly.
you. I, I apologize to the
Yeah,
audience. Don't
don't
worry
worry
about
about it. It was an accident. I was gonna.
it.
We're in the second half of the show, so maybe we should talk a little bit about the documentary that we were talking about this. So you've
Well,
been
from what I
approached.
understand, I've been approached by Tito Puente Jr.
Mm,
because I'm not gonna, he tells me, Uncle Joe, we need you. I saw this kid when he was born. So they know what I have, photos, audio. I have some video, but they're looking for old video.
right.
Unfortunately, I have a few old video when Tito had dark hair, you know, uh, which I do. I said, but unfortunately, there's other stuff where he had the white hair. Now they know I have audio, which eventually, you know, the fact that it's live, it makes it easier, you know, because it belongs to me,
You mean like
you know.
rights as far as like
Yeah. So I have live recordings of Tito that I managed to that the judge, there was a lawsuit. The judge wrote, so long as the live recording is not in an album that was done from a live recording, it belongs to the person.
who did it?
That's why today, that's why today you see so much stuff coming out in Europe. In Europe, they found the Miles Davis, which I have bootleg collection. They found Ella Fitzgerald doing things in a nightclub. So, I mean, these are things that belong to the individual. The company didn't record them live. Anything that was recorded live and you made a copy of it doesn't belong to you because it was recorded live, a
So
concert.
they're approaching you for the archive and
Well, the archive was not besides the archives. They're approaching me for about his life. I'm thinking I was
stories,
with this
right?
guy. Yeah. I mean, you could only, the family, Eddie Olmos, who I happen to know very well, the actor, you only know, families know so much of an artist and in a personal or private setting.
Right.
I knew, I knew Tito in both. It's a
Yeah,
difference.
and in the book, I mean that's an aspect of the book
Yeah.
that you were you shared all aspects of who he
Yeah.
was.
The only thing I didn't talk about in the book, which is religion, which I won't do now, or the Navy. Tito hated to talk about World War II, and most veterans do that, especially if they saw combat.
Right.
Yeah,
He was
they
in the
always
Navy,
said,
right?
yes. I tell him, how did you get into the Navy? He says, I was drafted. Because that struck me funny. Most people, like I was drafted, but I was drafted in the Army.
Right.
In World War II, they drafted him where he was needed. So it
Yeah.
became a whole nother ballgame. That's how
Yeah.
World War II.
Yeah. Sometimes they'd figure out based on your physical, like was he particularly tall? I think, is the Navy like
No,
usually.
Tito was my height. Tito was our height. He was
Yeah,
short.
exactly.
Five
So
six,
usually that's a
five
name,
seven.
You find them in the folks go in the Navy who are not particularly like the Marines. Usually they want people at 6 feet or something. And
well, they were in those days. It was World War II, so you went where they needed you.
yeah,
Don't forget, there were only it was called Army Air Force, the Marines, and the Navy.
yeah,
There was
right.
no Air Force at the time.
Yeah,
It was
Army
the
Air
Army.
Corps, right.
All right.
So with the, but we were talking before the show. You think that it's more than just a documentary at this point, that there may
Well,
actually
from what I
be like a
understand,
biography, a biopic?
I guess you call it that. They want to do a movie on Tito.
Well,
From what I
that's what it
understand.
is. It just means it's like a movie based on somebody's life.
I know, and then they want to do a separate thing, a documentary. They actually want to have actors play Tito. I said, not unless he's reincarnated. How do you duplicate Tito?
So
You know, I mean,
well, somebody's going to have to take some music lessons, right? Unless they hire a
they
musician.
could take it. No, well, Tito's son plays music, and so does older son. But you cannot. It's the intricacy. Nobody could play those drums. Yeah, Tito was an arranger, composer. He was the first to play vibes in Latin music. You know, a lot of people says you're kidding. I know. You know, I mean, he was. There's so many firsts. And how do you play right? Tito was a saxophone player. So I mean, there were so many things. He was versatile. And how much of you want to go into his life?
Oh, I've read the book, but I'm remembering. I mean, he studied music academically.
He studied academically. He went to Juilliard, and he studied the Schillinger method, which is based on math. Because he really wanted to do show tunes, movie scores, and everything. And you know, it turned out it was this way. You know, so I mean, there's so many things. And then you want to talk about his personal life. How far, how
No,
much
hey,
do
look,
you
I read the book. I don't need to get into, you know, into that aspect. I'm actually much for me. For me,
not
the
you.
music is to me the most interesting aspect about who he
Oh,
was.
no,
But
I understand, but I'm
well,
trying to say I know what Hollywood was like. I read the book, The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love, and it was X-rated and triple X. I had to tell the producer and Oscar Willis, may he rest in peace, you got to change this because they were going to base it on. I said, you can't do that. These guys are fathers and grandfathers. So they realized that they changed the storyline. I mean, they kept it up to read, but they took out all the R-rated stuff and X-rated. Because I saw the storybook board, like they say, but the book originally was like that. I said, no, wait. So, and Tito's, Machito's son and we spoke to the producer, and they changed it. They realized, I said, you can't make this, you know,
figure out
the way it was.
who the audience is.
Yeah. And the same thing with when I killed the guy in the movie. I am used to cursing in Spanish. Now I had to curse in English, and Tito had to educate me how to curse in a certain way because of the audience in Cuba in Miami. Because when you curse in Spanish, it may sound worse than what it is. So
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to watch that again to just see you. I mean, that was before I knew you, so but I got to look for your cameo and watch that film.
yeah, so it's just one of those things, And then it took me 15 takes. I had to remember that particular Palo Romero's. I had to remember. Are you ready? I had to remember where the break was.
The break. What do you mean of the between dialogue
I
or the
had
music?
to shoot. No. The guy dialogue. When the guy pulls the knife out on me, I pulled the gun out. I had to remember when to pull the gun out because there's certain breaks in the tune. Bam, 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 This is the original version of Pablo Romero. I said, son of a gun. Took me 15 times. I
Oh,
got it though.
so that was what was playing in the background. What we opened the show with.
No, that's what they were playing it. Tito
Right.
was playing it.
Oh, in the scene.
In the scene. It
Wow.
took me 15 takes. And I had to remember. And so I look at Tito and said, remember? I said, thank God. Well, I've learned that with Tito. He taught me. He said, you can read all the music in the world. You don't have an ear. You got a problem. Thank God I had an ear. I had an ear and I got it. And,
So you think that I guess this documentary, whatever movie, is probably on hold as a result of the pandemic, right? I mean, that's kind of slowed everything down.
Pandemic or no pandemic, I'm gonna be very honest with you. You gotta raise the money. You gotta get the money.
That's the first thing a producer has to do, right? Is produce the money to
produce
with.
Yeah. I mean, Eddie Olmos, I know him. He's a great actor, good friend. But it's his production company.
Oh my gosh!
You gotta raise the money. Forrest Whitaker, the other actor, his brother's involved, and then two other guys I don't know. But I spoke to all of them.
Well, this is whenever I'm a movie guy, and now in the digital age, what you do is like while you're watching a movie, you're on your phone looking at all the trivia about the movie, that whatever you find at Wikipedia or IMDb, and that's a classic where films can go on forever, decades trying to get produced, and through the process, what different people come in and take that role and move it around. But almost,
look what they're doing. Look what they're doing with The Godfather. They're trying to show you now. They want to do it differently. How it was made.
I've watched that, and it's fascinating. By the way, I'm just going to check if Dr. Riccio has anybody who's. I should basically check in with her to see if there are any questions. But usually she gets a hold of me when there are. So I'm guessing there aren't any questions from the others because we're getting down to the last 10 minutes of the show.
But we're talking about The Godfather. I can watch it 100 times, and there's always something you miss. But I also, like you say, I can relate to it. Don Corleone, Lucky Luciano. It's part of history. It's part of folklore.
Well, when you were talking and talking about how Puente would go to you to get things done, I thought of that term, button man, where you press a button and a guy goes away, that kind of thing. But I also use that term, I'm actually at the college. My role is to be a deputy chair, and sometimes my chair will say, get this done, and that's my job, to get that thing done, whatever it is. So your button, I think of that as like the button man. You press a button,
that was my role.
Something happens.
Yeah. He would ask his office to do something, and they couldn't do it. You didn't do it, forget about it. That is his favorite word. Forget about it. I'll let Joe do it.
Right on. Well, look, we're moving into the last 15 minutes of the show, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the future, some other thing, anything else that you got going on, because I know you've always got something going on besides the documentary.
I just did they interviewed me conversing with Joe Conzo, host of Scholars. That came out on Zoom because they posted. This was last Thursday. That was on Facebook. And basically what I have going for me now is the school. I'm teaching and just taking it easy and praying that this virus goes away. I mean, let's get a vaccine. Other than that, everything is good. I'm just dealing with life, taking it one day at a time. I check on my son all the time, on Joey, to make sure he's okay. And my other son. But other than that, everything's good. I mean, most of us are in the same boat.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so the hostess class, I don't know if you can hear me, the hostess class, right, which you teach for the adult and continuing education program, right?
Right.
That you're teaching that on Zoom?
On Zoom, virtual. Yep.
but it kind of
I had a
works out. And
great
so,
time. It
are
worked
you?
out perfect. It's like I play music, I talk about the history, I'll talk about Desianez, or I'll talk about Xavier Cougar. Tito, they know I could talk about a lot of students. I even got Colombia, South America. A student called me, it blew my mind. You know, people call me from all over on Zoom, and they join.
They
And
join it. So
also,
basically, anybody, yeah, you can. That's the beauty of Zoom, at least for the online ed class, that people can be. It
yeah,
doesn't just
yeah.
have to be New Yorkers anymore. That you've got people.
No,
And,
no, could be from no matter where, all over the world. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. And you join, you talk about it, and you know, you show them the movie. You say, you know, what the movie's all about. Like I mentioned about George Raft, who I known as a gangster in the 30s and 40s in the movies. Here's a clip of him dancing a rumba to the tune that opened the doors, the peanut thunder. You know,
right.
I said, you gotta be kidding. You know, he's sharp, his hair's back, slick, and everything. Looks great. You know, but James Cagney's the same way. All these guys, you know, Tito had a little bit of both of them because he was a dancer.
Right.
And in many ways, he walked like James Cagney.
I know
No,
that
he
walk
did.
on the toes, right? They'd walk on their
Yeah,
toes.
you know, he always had that type of walk. And, you know, and don't forget, he's a product of the 20s and 30s. So, you know, you went to the movies in those days, you heard the radio, and you looked at people, you know.
And you wanted
He's a
they
guy,
were your.
you know, the radio was a fantasy for everybody. You know, you dreamed, you heard music playing, Glenn Miller, you know, all these guys, the big bands, jazz. And then growing up in Spanish Harlem, you heard music on every corner.
Yeah. Can I ask you
Mhm.
this? Because I mean, I remember when I studied jazz, and in the '50s when bebop came up, it kind of coincided with a lot of the other things that were going on, and the big bands they couldn't maintain the big bands anymore. Ellington
No, it's
even struggled.
Arlington,
So
Arlington
how did Tino
Basie.
do it? How did Tino manage to? Because he was usually
Was a
playing with.
it was a different. Don't forget jazz. There were so many venues for jazz. What saved Cheeto, Machito, and Tito Rodriguez was the Palladium. This was another venue. This became the home of the mambo. There were nightclubs all over the place. In 52nd Street, which was around the corner from the Palladium, there were tons of jazz clubs.
Right.
You know, there were so many things. You had the Apollo, which showcased it. There were different types of music coming up. Besides the big bands, you had the mambo, the 54, you had the cha-cha-cha. You had the doo-wop groups coming up also. The Apollo would showcase the doo-wop groups and showcase the big bands. And, you know, it was a part of life. There was so much music, you know, and the radio played all types of music. Bebop was a sound that came up with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and them, but also Dizzy Gillespie brought in Latin jazz with Manteca in
Yeah.
1947.
With
So there were
Chano
so many
Pozo, right?
Chano Pozo. So there were so many things that came about, you know, and these guys they tried to go on a tour, and because of the South, they didn't make it. I'm talking about Tito Puente, Miguelito Valdez, and it was called Mambo USA. And you had another one called Rumba USA. I mean, there were so many venues that it was all over the place. It was a time, it was a fun time. But then you have to look at the culture, you know,
Wow.
uh,
Joe,
the gangs.
yeah,
Good.
you got all these stories. Have you? I mean, I know that the obviously being the authority on Puente, that was a great book. But you tell a lot of stories, and I'm just listening to it now, and I'm thinking if my students were listening, they don't know half of the references you're relating to.
No,
Have you
that's
considered
why
writing another book? Have you thought just about
we thought
your own
about it. I mean,
experience with?
Tito's books could 3 years. You know, there's so many things. I'm doing things now with the lecture series. You know, you go back to the same thing again. It takes money. It takes money. You got to find interest. I mean, nobody knew about this pandemic. I mean, you had aspirations to do this, do that, and now everybody's life is upside down. You know, I am very fortunate that I have a venue to showcase some of my stories and pictures and things like that, audio, video. But and social media like Facebook, you see a lot of the stuff from Puerto Rico. Roberto Santa Rosa, he finds pictures. Sometimes he can't identify them. So Johnny from Las Vegas identified them, or I identified them. Because I lived that period. You know, and we try to showcase on Facebook and tell people you got to look at. This is what the kids. And unfortunately, the colleges don't teach this. You know it as well as I do.
Well, yeah,
I
that's
told you.
why we got a class now. Bringing you to the college and as part of the Hispanic Heritage events, that was all mixed up with a grant. And one of the things that we revamped is, of course, I mean, we're calling it Latin American music, and it's got to all get mixed in. I mean, how much that gets into the American experience, which some people like divide
Well,
it up, and they'll
I
say like
mean,
Latinx.
I'll give you one. A perfect example. I love to meet Ken Burns and said, where was your brain, your head, and how much research did you do with jazz? That blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I said, he didn't do nothing. He left out the whole segment of Latin jazz. I think he mentions Chano Pozo in passing.
Yeah, he talks about it in relationship to Gillespie, and he does do a whole thing about his death. How he was killed.
Yeah,
that's not the first time he's let Latin Americans out of or the Latinx community. He did it in the World War II documentary too, where he had to go back and film extra footage because they had been left out.
Well, go to. I'll give you one. Joey managed to get me to go see the museum on what is it? The one in Washington D.C. on Black.
The African American Museum.
Yeah.
Smithsonian.
I read the curator, the writer. I said, who put this together? Oh, we didn't have enough room. I said, you left so many, even jazz. Besides that, I said, you left everything in Latin music. I said, you got a picture of Mongo Santa Maria, an album cover, a dress of Celia Cruz. I said, what happened to Graciela? What happened to Tito Puente? I said, Tito Puente's mother was black. She looked at me. What? I said, you got to be kidding. And I tell your board of directors, they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, it's always the same thing.
Well, maybe we need our own museum. Maybe we need a museum for Latin American history.
You know what? You want to laugh? Go to Arizona. There's a museum called the Museum of Music. They've sent me photos. I loaned them stuff of Tito. They have Tito Puente, but it's called the Museum of Music. There's music from all over the world. You go to Cuba, you got 4 or 5 museums. You go to Puerto Rico, 3 or 4 museums. You have no museums in New York City based on Latin music, which they call salsa today.
Right.
There's a museum because his father left him the building. It used to be a hardware store. It's called the Spanish Museum of Spanish Harlem. There's a lot of stuff there. Unfortunately, that's it. There's no museum where you can go and listen to music of Tito Puente. Tito Rodriguez,
It's a great.
Rafael Hernandez. You
I will
can't
say,
even go to.
LaGuardia does have a kiosk where we do have some of the music, Latin American music. I actually did a show about it. But you're right,
Oh,
and
that's good.
it's another oversight, but it's not the first or the last. Joe, guess what? We're almost out of time, so I want to just give you an opportunity. Is there anybody any shout outs or anybody?
No. I'll give you a shout out and thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. I'd love to bring you back again sometime if
All right.
if we ever get funding again to put together a Hispanic Heritage event and have you
You
come and
got it.
talk. And
All right.
and I want to thank our audience. And Joe, stick around while till the music plays, so we can talk at the end. But I just want to say you've been watching and listening to LaGuardia Web Radio WLGR. The show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez. My guest today has been Joe Conzo Sr., who is I would say, the foremost authority on the late Afro-Cuban jazz master Tito Puente. He's been talking a little bit about a documentary and possibly a fiction or a film biography about him that may come out once everything settles down. But as you can tell, he is also an authority on Americana and Latin America and music in general. So, Joe, just thanks for coming on, and everybody, thanks for listening. And we're going to go out the way we came in. Mr. Pope, take us out. Thanks for watching.